Now, quite a few, I'm seeing some familiar faces already from last night, so great to have you back again. And if you weren't with us last night, my name is Deborah Lockhart. It's coming up on my tile there, and I'm the CEO of the Australian Dispute Centre. And we are absolutely thrilled to be hosting you for this 2021 Asia Pacific Commercial Mediation Competition. So if that's not why you're on this link, it's time to hop off. But yesterday we spoke about wellness, and Bianca gave us some great insights into us just looking after ourselves through the competition, through the year, through life more generally, some great tips. And we'll be sending you through a little summary of what we spoke about last night. And for those who weren't online, we'll also, over the next week, we'll be making that available on our YouTube channel so you can catch up with it there. But today we're getting into the heart of why we're all here for the mediation. And we've got the privilege of having one of Australia's leading mediators and mediation trainers with us, and Lisa Frisken. So welcome, Lisa. And Lisa hails from the sunny Gold Coast. So those of you who have visited Australia, chances are if you went to Queensland, you went to the Gold Coast, where it's, what is the sunny one day and perfect the next, or something like that. It's really painful to everybody else when around the country, but it's gorgeous beaches and an amazing place. But more importantly, in terms of Lisa's background for you, Lisa was a lawyer, so she practiced as a commercial litigator, like many of you, I'm guessing, are likely to be doing or have ambitions to do. But after about 15 years of that, or is it 10 years, Lisa turned to the light and really focused on mediation as a career. And so Lisa she's on the Australian Dispute Centre faculty. She works at various tertiary institutions and is a great proponent of mediation and a great expert. So she's going to lead you through the mediation process so that you're all really solid in terms of the elements of the mediation process and what your role is going to be within that as competitors in the APCMC. So welcome, Lisa. Absolutely wonderful to have you with us. And I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Deborah Lockhart. Always a pleasure to be working with the ADC. I get a lot of joy out of meeting passionate mediation enthusiasts. Now, you're very kind, Deborah. I worked for several years as a litigator, as Deb said before, moving into mediation. I really enjoyed negotiation. So as part of my advocacy, it was really important to be able to negotiate along the way for my clients to understand their needs and interests and really assist them to get the best kind of outcomes for themselves. And often that involved negotiation rather than litigation. I'm sure on your journeys you're discovering some similarities there in your experiences, yeah? From what you've learned so far and your experience so far. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today. I had the joy of working as a mediator last year in the competition at times, and also as a judge, and I really enjoyed watching and listening to the mediations online. I think that sometimes we've been in the past a bit concerned or curious about how online might work. I'm hoping that you enjoy working online just as much as I have last year in the competition. So welcome from me. Thank you to Australian Dispute Centre. and the APCMC is a wonderful event that I'm so delighted to be speaking at. Now, what I've done is prepared some slides because I thought working through the mediation process, which is my topic for tonight, it's helpful to have a visual. I'm not sure that you've got the PowerPoints yet, but we can get those out to you after the webinar tonight so that you have something to perhaps hang on to perhaps. So without any further ado, let's just get a cracking, shall we? And no doubt along the way, there might be some points that you find are particularly interesting, some key takeaways to help you prepare for the competition. And also there might be some questions or curiosities that arise as we go through this. So feel free to pop something in the chat. And maybe at the end of the talk tonight, we'll have a bit of a discussion around what the key takeaways are from the webinar. So shall we make a start? I'll just share my screen with the PowerPoints just for a moment, just to talk through for a minute. So I thought it was helpful to first think about what is mediation. You can all see the PowerPoints, Deb, that's all good for you? Great, fantastic, always good to get feedback. So remembering that mediation is a process in which parties who are in dispute, they've got some kind of difficulty that's arisen between them, that's ended up with them having either actual or perceived differences in their needs and interests. So a process in which disputing parties, with the assistance of the mediator, who's a neutral third party, the mediator assists them to identify what the issues are between them, helps them to develop options, consider alternatives, and move on a journey towards reaching an agreement. So in the model that I'm going to be talking through today, it's the facilitative integrative mediation process, which is generally the national standard in Australia and many other countries, I think from where you're all going to hail. I know Singapore definitely has this facilitative type process. Now there's some variations between processes that you might see arising from the talk tonight. So make some notes yourself and more than welcome to raise any questions or observations around any differences that you might have noticed. So remembering in the mediation process, the mediator does not have any advisory or determinative role. The spirit of mediation is self-determination, in which the mediator supports the parties to make decisions for themselves, create space for them to speak openly with each other, to understand each other and be understood, and to work towards agreements that they might make between them. So no advisory role, no determination type role. Some other processes have a determination role that a third party intervener might take. You will have probably looked at something like arbitration as another dispute resolution process, or litigations, a third party determination process. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a mediator opening space for parties to work through their own issues between them. So who are the players in a mediation? Now there's always going to be parties, and the parties play an active role in the process, quite different to the judicial system, where the legal representatives play the advocacy role for the parties. Here, in the mediation process, we have legal representatives playing an advocacy role for the parties, but the active role in the primary is the parties participating in the process. So the parties and legal representatives are really working as a team. I'm going to look a little bit closer around the roles of parties and legal representatives in a moment after we work through the actual mediation process. And this button is not working on my computer to go to the next slide, so I'll just stop sharing for a moment. So just, excuse me for one moment, I'm going to have to go off this view. Just share my screen again. So let's have a look at what that process is. So you can all see the slide? Yes, wonderful. So this is the mediation model that we use at ADC, the Australian Dispute Centre, in our training. So what we're going to do is walk through these 7 steps of the model. So just noticing in the top triangle, we have the intention of exploring and defining the problem or understanding the current situation. It's important to understand the current situation before then moving into the bottom triangle of the model, where the parties will focus on the future, on what options that they might have, negotiating towards final outcomes, evaluating those options, seeing what might work best, and recording agreements and finalising the agreements. So just remembering that to begin with, we look at understanding the current situation and defining it before we move on to options for resolution. Now you'll notice in the very middle of the 2 triangles, we've got a separate sessions bubble. And that separate sessions bubble is where we're going to have, a mediator is going to have separate meetings with each party individually and confidentially to assist them to prepare to participate further in the mediation. So it's usually around that after exploring and defining the problem stage of the process. Just moving to the next. So I'm going to separate the mediation process out and just have a talk about each particular stage of the process. So the first stage is the mediator's opening statement. And in this stage of the process, the mediator is creating a safe space for the parties, setting a tone of confidence in the mediator, in the mediation process, giving clear understanding around the structure of the process. Now, to begin with, most often the mediator will introduce themselves and establish their role as mediator, particularly when we're working online. Sometimes we may not have met in person, there might have only been meeting over the telephone, just to establish some rapport and also identify, importantly, the parties to the process so that they can meet each other. Identifying what the roles and responsibilities of each person participating in the mediation process is really important too, to understand who the party is, who the representatives or advisors are in a mediation process, so that everyone can be clear around roles and responsibilities within the mediation process. So in this mediator's opening statement, it's usual for the mediator to gain some kind of commitment from the parties to the process, to participating in the process, and also that important key feature of confidentiality to the mediation, which is a key reason why many parties choose to participate in mediation. Now, there might be some authority to settle that's clarified and confirmed at the commencement of the mediation so that the parties can observe and hear that each other have authority to settle the mediation on the day. Just moving through to the second stage. So once the mediation has been opened with the mediator's opening statement, then the next step in the mediation process are the parties' opening statements. So at this stage in the process, the mediator will invite each party to give a brief outline of what brings them to the mediation and what they would like to discuss. So these are individual brief outlines that each party might give. Now, where there are legal representatives, present at the mediation, the mediator will most often give the parties' legal representatives an opportunity also to give an outline of potentially the legal issues that might be involved in the situation. The intention here is to give each party a full opportunity to hear and be heard on the issues that they'd like to discuss. A key consideration here for the second speaker, so the second party giving their opening statement, is that it's not a response to the first party's opening statement. It comes from a space that the second speaker brings to the mediation themselves, because both parties will have some clear issues and points that they would like to discuss in the mediation themselves. The time for responding and discussing each other's issues is yet to come in the mediation process. After the mediator has heard each party's opening statement, then the mediator will give a brief summary to ensure that they've heard the topics that the parties would like to discuss and what brings each party to the mediation. And that's to clarify understanding before moving forward. What this gives is an extra opportunity for both parties to hear the other's outline of the topics that they would like to discuss also. So there might have been something that's either party might not have quite heard in its entirety. And so that can be a really useful part of the process for parties to listen to those summaries of the opening statements. Now, the intention here is for gathering of information by the mediator and between the parties in order to participate in the next step, which is to set the agenda of the matters to discuss. So just moving into that stage of the process, what's really important here in terms of agenda setting is that all of the topics that both parties are wanting to discuss are covered. Because it's important for parties to be assured that each of their topics are going to be discussed within the mediation process. So this agenda forms, if you like, a list of topics, a backbone or framework for the discussions to follow. And it sits hand in hand with the mediation process. So we've got a procedural list of things to discuss, and we've also got the mediation process in terms of the two triangles to work through. Now, what is intended in terms of this agenda is that topics are focused on, rather than each party's objectives or goals that they want to achieve out of the mediation individually. So the agenda looks to try and identify topics that might be mutual between the parties. The agenda seeks to identify topics that would be neutral and also future focused. So the intention is that from the agenda topics, there can be some discussions and then action plans that might follow. An example of what I mean by this is, say, for example, one party wants the wall painted red and another party would like the wall painted green. Then the agenda wouldn't say, should it be green or should it be red? It would say, for example, what colour would be suitable? So they're main headings that discussions might flow under. Each party might see the particular topic from different perspectives, but the topic nevertheless might be common to both parties. So that's the overall goal of this agenda setting. After the agenda is set, and I should say before moving on, confirmed and clarified with the parties, because the parties need to make sure that they're reflected in the agenda, their topics are reflected in the agenda. It's usual for a mediator to check in with the parties, and it's usual for parties or representatives just to double check to make sure all the topics are covered, and something might need to be added in order to feel that your topics are fully represented in the agenda. So moving on to the next stage, explore and define the problem is meaning discussing all agenda topics. So with the framework of the agenda, the mediator will assist and encourage parties to speak with each other so that they can share their perspectives on each topic, how they see things, what's important to them moving forward, what their overall objectives might be, what they're looking to try and achieve in the future, so that they can understand each other more fully. What assists and what we often look at in terms of exploring and defining the problem is what lies beneath, why each party wants what they want. So what their actual needs and interests are if we explore below what they're saying that they'd like to achieve. It's important for parties to understand this interest-based focus within the facilitative model, because it assists parties to ask questions of each other and share information with each other so that they can understand each other at that deeper level. A mediator may assist the parties in their discussions by improving communication or understanding, bringing a focus back between the parties on what topics they're trying to discuss. A mediator might assist the parties by acknowledging where there's some constructive ground gained, or there are positive shifts in terms of understanding each other and finding common ground. A mediator may also assist where the discussions may have backslided, if you like, into less than constructive or becoming circular, perhaps. And that can assist the parties to think about the valuable use of their time in the discussions to move the discussions on. There's a lot of value that mediators add to this stage of the process where it's needed. When negotiators, and so parties to the mediation and their legal representatives are well prepared in understanding the issues and the interests of their clients, and are use a range of skills to open up discussions and really focus them on understanding each other and creating a collaborative space, then mediators have the opportunity to sit back and enable that flow and that communication to develop between the parties. And that's what we're hoping to achieve. So, as I mentioned, the mediator will use the agenda, and the parties will also use the agenda to make sure that they hold some space to talk fully about what's important to each of them around each of the agenda topics. Now, once all of those agenda topics have been covered and there is a sense of understanding, mutual understanding of the situation between the parties. So remember, we're talking about understanding the current situation, how the parties are each positioned, what's important to each of the parties. So once you have an understanding of the other party and you feel understood by the other party, it may flag a readiness, and a mediator will notice a readiness to move on in the process towards the future. Sometimes this might be signalled by the parties. An indication might be given by the parties to the mediator that they're ready to move on. Now, in our model of mediation with the Australian Dispute Centre, at this time we place our separate sessions. This is a stage in the process where the mediator will meet individually with each of the parties, privately and confidentially, to assist them to prepare to participate in the rest of the mediation process. There may well have been some options and some needs and interests that have been understood around the table before moving into these separate sessions. Sometimes there may not have been many options and understandings reached between the parties. So the separate session is an opportunity to work with the mediator in order to become more prepared to participate in the rest of the mediation process, to raise anything that may not have been raised already, that might be important for each party to raise. It might be that parties have had a struggle just quite knowing how to raise something that is a little bit uncomfortable in the mediation. Or there might be something that parties might have discovered in the joint mediation session that they're not quite sure how they're going to handle moving forward. So this creates an opportunity for parties to work with the mediator, who will assist them to prepare to move through the rest of the mediation process. In terms of aims, a mediator is looking to perhaps at times reality test positions or some understandings that might even be misperceptions or might not have really considered other aspects of the discussions that have been had so far. There might be assumptions that might have been made. There might be an unwillingness for parties to expand their thinking and consider a range of different potential options. So a mediator will check in and help parties prepare to present options when they move back into the mediation joint session. What really is important here in preparation for the mediation for parties and legal representatives, and also an opportunity here in separate sessions, is to think about how they're going to move towards a workable outcome. There's often new things that might have been heard that might help parties to move towards that workable outcome, but they may not. Now I'm going to step into a little bit of the territory of your next, I think it's the next speaker, who's going to speak on negotiation. You're going to have the wonderful Lawrence Bull. And so this is an opportunity here in the separate sessions. I'm going to throw these little terms out, the BATNA, WATNA and the ZOPA, that Lawrence is going to further dive into with you, no doubt, in his topic. So what...
Lisa, can I just interrupt there, because the team the group hasn't got the date and Lawrence's name. So it's next Monday, folks. We're going to have the session on negotiation. So thank you. So great start, Lisa, to introduce everyone to a few mediation acronyms. Everybody needs an acronym, don't they?
So they're some of my favourites because they're really helpful to think about in preparation for your negotiations. And they're really helpful also to a mediator to work with the parties, to encourage them to think about. So your BATNA will be your best alternative to negotiating an agreement here today in the mediation. In preparation for the mediation, you will have considered this, no doubt, what kind of options there might be outside of negotiating an agreement with the other party. So your BATNA is your best alternative. Your WATNA is the worst alternative. What might happen if things go really south? The consequences and impact of that on your client or on the party. And the ZOPA, the zone of possible agreement. And so the zone of possible agreement is where both parties might have some similarities in terms of the outcomes that they're prepared to consider. So we call this a positive ZOPA. If there's no overlap of potential agreements, then there's a negative ZOFA, and it's harder work for parties to try and reach agreement. Now, more of that when you speak with Lawrence, because he's going to give you a full webinar on negotiation theory and preparing for your mediations. So at the end of a separate session, so the mediator will hold a separate session with each party individually. And as I mentioned, they're confidential. So the mediator doesn't pass messages between the parties from one separate session to the next, nor does the mediator raise anything that's raised with them confidentially in the separate sessions when they bring the parties back together in the joint session. So they're strictly confidential and intended to assist parties to prepare to work towards resolution. At the end of a separate session, there ought to be a readiness to move into the next stage of the process, and you can flag that to your mediator if you have separate sessions that you're ready to move on into the next stage of the mediation process. Okay. When we come back together in the joint session again, we're in stage 5. So this is where the mediators will bring the parties back together so that they can discuss things together again. Now, the focus here, remember when we were on the mediation model before? So up until this stage, we've been on exploring and defining the problem, understanding the current situation. So parties understanding each other, lawyers understanding the other party so that they can advise their clients effectively. We've conducted our separate sessions, and now we're in the bottom triangle, you'll notice. We're focusing on the future. It's the negotiation and solution stage. So let's jump into stage 5 and look at what happens in this stage. You'll all be no doubt quite familiar with the mediation model, and this is probably simply a reminder. So at the Australian Dispute Centre, we encourage a focus here in stage 5 on generating and exploring options. So this is where the parties regroup and table a range of options that they may have come up with in their separate sessions. Importantly, covering all of the agenda topics so that they are moving forward on each of the issues. Now, a mediator might use the agenda here to create some structural space, or parties may quite effectively do this themselves so that they're still able to structure the discussions between them and ensure that they have had the opportunity and they've tabled all the options that are important to them moving forward. So tabling of options gives parties a chance to consider each other's options and how effective they may be. Now, what we call that is moving into the next stage of the process, stage 6, where in the Australian Dispute Centre model, we encourage the parties to evaluate the options. Look at the pros and cons of each of the options, what might work effectively, what kind of options both parties might consider are less attractive, so that they can hopefully move in the same direction towards some common ground in terms of future actions. A mediator will assist the parties to focus on their interests if the interests of parties have been left behind. So one way of thinking about evaluating options is thinking about how effective options suit and meet both parties' interests and needs in the situation. So it's important to have had that understanding of each other's interests moving forward into this stage to really be effective in your discussions in the evaluation and negotiation stage. In this stage of the process, parties might be assisted by focusing on some details around what might be required to achieve a sustainable agreement between them. To road test, if you like, what working with a particular option might look like. What would be involved? What kind of time, budget, resources? Who's going to contribute towards time, budget, resources? Often during this stage, there will be a real sense of progression and moving forward constructively together. And in my experience, there can be a great sense of flow and achievement that parties experience at this stage of the process. Often in this stage of the process, things might be discussed in principle, and parties seem to be pretty much on the same page in terms of the types of options that they sound like they might be looking to work with. In principle agreements often come before the detail. Now, the detail is important to get to in terms of sustainable agreements. So who does what to whom and when becomes really important. And discussing this in this stage is quite effective. The mediator will assist parties to discuss the details here as well before moving into stage 7, the last stage of the process, finalising the agreement in writing. Having said that, a lot of detail often comes out when parties consider putting their agreements down on paper. It may be that parties feel comfortable to table ideas and work together collaboratively to see what an agreement might look like if there's not pressure to feel as if things are locked in as they go along, because the agreement has to start somewhere and finish somewhere. So there might be reluctance to lock things down until the whole agreement is seen in full. So a mediator might facilitate discussions around no agreement until full agreement, or parties may themselves develop this collaborative environment between them where they're problem solving together in the drafting of the detail of the agreement between them. It's important that the mediator documents for the parties, and usually will use the party's own words. So this is quite an active role for the parties to participate in crafting the agreements between them as they see fit. And after all, they're the experts on the subject matter and what the needs and interests are in the situation. Sometimes it might be important for the lawyers to become involved in this agreement drafting stage as well, to make sure that any legal aspects are covered off between them. Part of the discussions here in terms of finalising the agreement are usually around the formality of the mediated agreements, whether they're going to be signed, how commitment to the agreements is going to be shown, whether they are intended to be binding or not, whether they're intended to be confidential between the parties or not. So that usually will form part of the discussions at this stage of the process. Importantly, again, checking in with the agenda to ensure that all the topics have been covered in the agreement drafting stage here. Formalities around the document, the parties, identifying the parties, who is present at the mediation, your mediation date, the agreement date, time, place might be involved there. Numbering the pages should be considered so that we can establish that there's full agreement, you know, page 1 of 2 on page 2 of 2, so that down the track there's certainty as to what was agreed between the parties and there's not something missing. Now, when everything has been finalised between the parties and the parties are satisfied that their needs and interests have been met. And a good benchmark to check off for parties, their legal representatives, and the mediator is what we call the triangle of satisfaction. It comes from Christopher Moore's work, if you're familiar with Christopher Moore. And he talks about the triangle of satisfaction having three components. The first of those components is substantive interests. So that's the tangible outcomes that parties are seeking. The building, the painting of the ship to be orange or yellow, the submarine to be yellow rather than the ship to be grey. The amount that might be paid, the time and date that it might be paid, those substantive type outcomes. Christopher Moore's model has a second component. So the three components, substantive, the second component is procedural. So parties will have some procedural interests. So you can think about those, whether it be within the mediation process, the parties still have something that they might want to share or work through that they haven't had the opportunity yet, or it might be that there might be some certain actions that need to be committed to by parties moving forward within the agreements. And the third component of the model, the triangle of satisfaction, is psychological or emotive. And it relates to the relationship between the parties, feeling that they're able to move forward in a more positive way into the future. Often those 3 points, substantive, procedural, or relational, let's call them, are the reasons why there might be impasse. So where we're at the agreement stage and parties might have come to agreements all around except for one tricky matter, then using that triangle of satisfaction and thinking about whether the parties between you have got stuck on substance, procedure, or relational issues can be helpful to think about there. Okay, so that is our mediation model that I promised that I would talk through. Now, of course, there's pre-mediation activities, and then there might be activities that might happen post-mediation with formalising agreements that might, be required to be court ordered. There might be systems within, say, for example, organisations where agreements need to be checked off. All of those kind of post-mediation activities could be documented and agreed to between the parties for certainty. Pre-mediation is really important too. It's how do we get ready to participate in this joint mediation session where parties come together and meet in order to create this safe space, constructive dialogue to understand each other before then moving forward and looking at options that might meet both parties' interests. So it can be really helpful to think about our roles. And some of our roles come down to preparation. So if we look at the role of the mediator is managing the mediation process, the top and bottom triangle. The mediator might have met with parties beforehand in order to establish some understanding around the matter. And sometimes the mediator may not have. I should say it's best practice in the real world to hold pre-mediation sessions with each party to assist parties to prepare for mediation. But at the APCMC, you're all well prepared, and how are you preparing yourselves is what we're going to get to in the next slide. Let's have a look at that. So what is the role of parties, representatives, and advisors? So important for, and I understand in the competition, there will be clients, parties, and there will be legal representatives often. So I'm going to focus on those two aspects primarily here. So what's important for legal representatives is that they act in the best interests of their clients, and that involves participating in a non-adversarial way to create a collaborative problem-solving environment and relationship between them, between parties and between legal reps. Excuse me. How do we do this? We do this by using rapport, by demonstrating our desire to understand and our understanding of each other, using empathy. We use, importantly, communication micro skills to effectively create understanding and dialogue in a collaborative type environment. That's the aim of the game, to create a collaborative environment. Those micro skills involve, really importantly, active listening. I'd say that active listening is the key skill in order to understand what's important to the other party. Acknowledging what's important to the other party demonstrates your understanding of what's important to each other as parties. Summarising to make sure that you're clear on what has been said and your understanding aligns with the intended message that the other party might have shared. Reframing can be a really useful tool. Mediators use it very much. Reframing involves shifting the focus of what's been raised into a more constructive zone. It assists to deal with any hiccups that might arise. Reframing often looks towards something that might be neutral, mutual, future focus, and focus on balancing power between the parties. So importantly, to look towards the future. Good negotiators and legal representatives are not only short-term focus, they also focus on the mid and long term. So they look at each different aspect of the short and longer term between the parties. Now, there's on the ADC website, there's a wonderful paper by Chief Justice Bathurst, who's delivered a few addresses, I think, for ADC. The most recent this year, the 35th anniversary, Deb, which was a wonderful talk that he gave, and echo what he's mentioned in this earlier speech that he gave, highlighting the importance of advocacy for legal representatives. And this is dispute resolution advocacy, quite different to courtroom adversarial advocacy. It assists us as lawyer participants in mediations to focus on our obligations to the best interests of our clients, to competence and diligence, and to achieving the best results for our clients. And the way that we do that is through these non-adversarial methods. I hope that that's the end of our slides for tonight. I hope that that has been interesting and has raised some points for each of you. So what I'm interested to open up is a discussion, if you like. I'm going to stop sharing and ask you, put this question out to everyone. What are your key takeaway points from today? You might take a pen and paper. There's another thing that I'm going to get us to do in a moment. So grab your pen and paper and just for a moment, make a note of what your 3 top takeaway points are from today moving into the competition. I'm just going to stop share screen so I can see you all. There might be, when you're ready, Deb, you might like to pop something in the chat, do you think?
Yeah, look, you might drop it into the chat, everyone, and then we can share it.
Lovely. There's one more little model that I want to demonstrate before we finish today.
Also, if you've got any questions, anyone, just put your cameras on or microphones on, or put it in the chat.
Yep.
Yeah.
Always lovely to see a face, yeah?
Yeah.
I do have a question, Lisa. First, thank you so much for your presentation. That was so helpful. I was just wondering, back around setting the agenda, from previous competitions, I've heard from different judges that they like the mediator to set it, or in the alternate, they like the parties themselves to agree on it. What do you think is the preferred approach?
Right, so I think mediators often take a lead role in this stage of the process to identify that it's time to set the agenda. And often the mediator will do it in collaboration with the parties. I think a key principle that you can think about around this agenda setting is the parties own the agenda. Yeah. The mediator assists the parties to frame the agenda in a way that's going to create opportunity for constructive dialogue. So the mediator will assist the parties to set the agenda. Often the mediator will take a lead role to get the process up and running, particularly when we have less than experienced negotiators. When we have wonderfully focused, collaborative, non-adversarial negotiators in a mediation, then the parties may well, develop the agenda between them with little need of the mediator to take a more active role there. I'm hoping that this assists with your question, Kate.
Can I just, if I may just add, the other rider to that, Kate and Lisa, is that in the competition, we're going to have mediators from all over the world, and they're all going to have their own approach. And so you as the parties are going to will be working with the mediator in terms of what, and they may change, their approaches may differ. So I think it's just working with the mediator to, in terms of how him or her may like to do it, or think that's needed in this particular mediation. Yeah, because mediators will change their approach depending on the parties as well. So you might get a variety of approaches, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much to the two of you. That's very helpful.
Lovely.
There's a question from Martin, Lisa.
There is. How can we best know when to stop fact-finding and move into agenda setting? Interesting question, Martin. Where are you? Where are you coming to us from there? Oh, I see. You're on the screen. Brisbane, UQ. Hi. Just up the road. So, Martin, agenda setting stage comes after the party's opening statement stage. So in terms of the intention of the party's opening statement stage, the intention there is to give an outline of what's important to each party and what they'd like to cover within the main discussion within the mediation. So we know it's time to move into agenda setting stage when each party have given their brief outline and the mediator has summarised back. Moving into agenda setting stage creates that list of topics for the main body of the discussions to follow. You may find that there might be another topic that might need to go on to the agenda a little bit later. It might arise during the exploration stage, and you could invite agreement on adding another topic to the agenda if you don't think everything's covered, if something's arisen in the discussions. But the main intention of the exploration stage, that's stage 4 of our ADC model, explore and define the problem, is looking to gain that greater understanding around the what's important, this current situation, what's happening now, what the issues mean to each party, and what their experiences are, if you like. So I'd suggest that there's a bulk of the discussion that happens after the agenda setting stage, where there might be a lot of information that's discovered through the dialogue in the exploration stage of the model. So it might not be that before getting into agenda, there's clarity around the facts of the situation, and often parties might both see the facts from different perspectives. It was described to me when I first started mediating. Example, here. Both parties are talking about this book. And I asked party A, what is this book? I should hold up Lawrence's book, shouldn't I? Here we go. Sorry, Lawrence and Naja's. Talking about the current, whatever this current situation is. And party A says, Lisa, it is a book that says Mediation Skills and Techniques, 3rd edition by Lawrence Bull and Naja Alexander. And it's got a green picture of a key with a door on the front. And party B says to the mediator, yes, I'm looking at that as well. And I can see there's no green door and there's no key, and it doesn't say those people's name, and it just says a whole heap of words. Well, it does say that. It does say the people's name and mediation skills and techniques, but it's got a whole heap of writing on it. And if I were to look at deciding at that stage of the parties giving their opening statements about what both of them were actually looking at and what the fact of the matter was, then parties could well get into an argument about whether it's blue or whether it's white, whether it's got a lot of words on it or whether it's got a picture on it. And that's what we're trying to avoid in a mediation process, is arguing over the facts at this stage in the process. We're simply looking to identify that the parties both want to talk about the book. After we've set the agenda and we've got the book on the agenda, then parties might then have a conversation with each other and respond to each other at that stage. And party A might say, well, if you turn the book over, what do you see then? Oh, I see this, and that's what I'm looking at. And oh, we've both discovered that we're looking at this multi-dimensional situation, fact of the matter, yeah? So it's really key to try to avoid focusing on the fact of the matter early in my experience, because it can be a bit of a red herring, if you like. Simply before that agenda setting stage, to talk about what's important to each party and the topics that they'd like to discuss is really important moving into that agenda setting. When the parties sound like they've got a full understanding that it's a 458-page book in all its entirety in the exploration stage, then we might be understanding that it's time to move into option generation stage. I'm not sure how well I connected my answer with the question. Oh, and Deb, you might have other views.
All I was going to know, I think that's great. That's really helpful, Lisa. I found it helpful. And the only other thing that I would add is that the mediator, remember, the mediator's job is to manage the process. So, so Martin, one other response to yours is that the mediator can be the guide in terms of when to move to the next step. So you can be, the part and parcel of your role and what the judges will be looking out for is also your ability to use the mediator, and to so that the mediator is adding is helping you add value to your negotiation by facilitating the process for you. So, and that moving from stage to stage ultimately is very much the role of the mediator. You can suggest it, but if they think there's something more to be done in that stage, they will let you know. Yeah.
Lovely.
Oh, all right. Is any more questions, anyone, before we wrap up? I'm just conscious that we've hit our hour mark. Any more questions?
I didn't get to draw my diagram. Thanks, Martin, for sharing. I think that clarified it a bit for you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Or a lot.
It's great to have you on board, and we're not seeing a lot of faces at the moment, Lisa. They've all gone shy on us, or they're busy writing notes or something. But can you all find your clap function with the hands that clap? And there you go. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, everyone. I would like to wish everyone all the best in the competition. As my original mediation trainer wrote in an article, preparation, preparation, preparation. That was John Wade, is the key to a successful negotiation and mediation. Yeah. I'd like to, wish you all well.
Thanks. Thank you, Lisa. And we really appreciate you making the time available to take us through the mediation process. That is absolutely fundamental to how the teams are going to, the structure in which they're working. So great for you all to have some further insights on that. Now, next week, and it'll be next Monday, we'll send you all of the details, and it will be on the same link. But Professor Lawrence Bull will be speaking with you about negotiation and negotiation strategies in the framework of the mediation and the mediation competition. So that's a not to be missed, another not to be missed event. And can I just get a show of hands, because I'm not seeing you there. A show of hands. Did you enjoy having the time beforehand to do the roulette networking? Was that fun? Should we do more of that next week? Put that on again. This is a self-determinative process.
Oh.
Hands, yes. Thumbs, here we go.
I'm counting a few thumbs and they're all keep on popping up, Deb.
Yeah.
Thumbs up.
All right, thumbs up. Great. All right, so we'll be opening the rooms at 4:30 again. So come on early. That gives you a chance to meet, at least 3 or 4 different groups of people. We'll try and keep the groups small, so you've actually got a chance to say more than your name. And it is a great way for you to start to get to know people along the way. So thanks again. We'll send you through those details, and we'll see you online next week. Okay, thanks, Lisa. Thank you again. Really
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your wellness routine now that Bianca mentioned to you. She was great.
Okay.